King Charles just stripped Camilla of her title in the most brutal way imaginable. Her own husband never called her, never warned her. She found out the exact same way every stranger scrolling the headlines did. And buried inside this story is something nobody saw coming. A letter Diana wrote decades ago that has been quietly steering this entire family ever since. What happened next tore through this entire family, and by the time it was over, everything Camilla spent 30 years building was already gone. The morning Camilla found out. The betrayal landed at 7 in the morning, in the 1 hour Camilla had guarded as sacred for 30 straight years. Whoever timed it knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted her completely alone when the floor dropped out from under her. Camilla was at her own private residence outside London that morning, far from Charles. Just like most mornings lately, that distance between them had grown slowly over the past year and a half, and almost nobody outside the closest staff noticed it happening in real time. Camilla would spend 3 or 4 nights at her own residence in a row, then appear beside Charles for a single public event, smile for the cameras, and quietly disappear again the next morning. Staff who served both households began comparing notes without even realizing they were doing it, and they all landed on the same uneasy conclusion. The marriage the whole country had once fought so hard to accept was already drifting apart long before any document ever leaked. That morning, Camilla's tablet buzzed with what looked like her usual daily briefing. Instead, it carried a leaked royal household-style guide, and buried inside it was a single brutal line. The word "consort" was being ripped out of every future constitutional and succession document, as if 30 years of fighting for that word had never happened at all. Camilla stared at the screen and froze. She read it again and again, yet the words refused to change. She immediately demanded a printed copy because some twisted part of her needed to hold the proof in her hands before she could believe the palace had actually done this to her. For almost a full minute, Camilla said absolutely nothing. What do you even say in a moment like that? Then she grabbed her phone, and her first call wasn't to her husband. It was to her sister, Annabelle Elliott. Camilla read the same paragraph to Annabelle twice, and her fury rose higher with every word she spoke. Annabelle asked her one simple question that cut right to the point. Had Charles called her even once that morning to explain any of it himself? Camilla's answer came out flat and bitter. No, not a call, not a message, not even a quiet warning sent through an aide the night before. Her own husband had let her find out about the revocation of her title from a leaked document, just like every other stranger scrolling through the headlines that day. Now, here's where the knife really twists. The leak didn't come from some desperate junior staffer chasing a payout. It came from a woman who had served the household for over 2 decades, a loyalist from the era of the late Queen Elizabeth, who never really accepted Camilla. To that small circle of old guard staff, Camilla had always been the woman who broke something sacred. No matter how many decades passed, or how many royal duties she carried out with perfect grace, the woman handed that document to a journalist for nothing in return. And when a colleague asked her why, her answer was ice cold. She wanted Camilla to finally know exactly what it felt like to find out about the collapse of her marriage from the news headlines, just like Diana had once felt. Decades of buried hatred had just found its perfect moment to strike. And just when you think this couldn't get any more brutal for Camilla, here comes the gut punch. Months before any of this exploded into public view, Camilla had secretly drafted her own letter giving up the Queen title on her own terms as a bargaining chip for her future security once Charles was gone. Camilla had even carefully chosen someone outside palace circles with no motive to leak a single word of it as a solicitor. But Camilla never sent that letter. She was saving it for the right moment, the moment when giving something up would buy her safety instead of shame. Now the palace had ripped that exact weapon straight out of her hands and turned it against her in public, leaving her with absolutely nothing left to bargain with. On Camilla's direction, Annabelle marched straight to the palace, demanding answers. She got 40 minutes of silence instead, pacing in an anteroom while a junior aide refused to even meet her eyes before mumbling that the king was unavailable. Unavailable? To his own wife's sister, on the day his wife's entire identity was being torn apart? That silence screamed louder than any statement ever could. Annabelle later confided to a close friend that the wait itself wasn't even the worst part. It was the look on that young aide's face, the look of someone who had been coached on exactly what to say and exactly how long to stall before saying it. Camilla also called her son Tom Parker Bowles that afternoon and warned him not to react publicly yet, not until she understood exactly how deep this went. Tom wanted to fight back immediately, but Camilla told him to wait. She needed to face Charles first, before anyone else got involved and made this messier than it already was. By the time the sun went down, Camilla had made her decision. She was walking straight into Charles's study that night, and she was going to make him answer for this. Camilla already knew what had happened. Now she wanted to know why. And across the palace, Charles had spent 11 agonizing days praying that question would never reach him. Tonight, his luck was about to run out completely. The study, the silence, and the son who knew. The real war finally began the moment Camilla stormed into Charles's study. The king's private secretary, Lord Hawthorne, stood frozen by the door, like a silent witness to a marriage about to shatter in front of him. Camilla didn't scream. She didn't need to. She just locked eyes with Charles and asked him one savage question. "Did you let them do this to me, or did you ask them to do it?" Charles stood there in silence for several long seconds. When he finally spoke, his words confirmed everything Camilla feared. He told her he had simply run out of time to protect her the way he wanted to. That single sentence was a confession dressed up as an excuse. Camilla's reply cut straight through him. For 30 years, half the country called her the other woman, and he had just admitted in his own study, with his own mouth, that it was true the entire time. She turned and walked out without another word. 4 brutal days of silence followed, with every message between them dragged back and forth through Lord Hawthorne like two enemies negotiating a ceasefire. During those 4 days, Charles reportedly tried twice to send Camilla a personal note rather than a formal message, and both times he tore it up before Hawthorne could deliver it. He couldn't find words that didn't sound like an apology for something he wasn't fully ready to call wrong. Camilla, for her part, kept every single one of Hawthorne's formal updates and filed them away almost like evidence, as though she already suspected she might need proof one day of exactly how this had been handled. So how did it ever get this far? Months earlier, a confidential health report landed in front of the Privy Council, and it didn't just raise eyebrows. It gave them a number. Charles's reign had a countdown now, measured in single years. Hawthorne grabbed that report and ran straight to Charles with a brutal warning. If Charles died with Camilla's title still tangled in confusion, Prince William would inherit a constitutional nightmare on the same day he buried his father. Better to rip the bandage off now, Hawthorne argued, while Charles could still control the bleeding himself. Not every advisor agreed, though. One camp wanted to wait until after Charles's death and dump the mess on William's future team. Hawthorne's camp wanted it done immediately and quietly through paperwork instead of headlines. Charles, growing weaker by the day, finally caved in to Hawthorne's demands. Insiders say the meeting where Charles gave his final approval lasted less than 10 minutes, and he reportedly signed off without reading the full document himself, telling Hawthorne simply to handle it the way he thought was right. That single moment of exhaustion may have cost Charles more than he ever expected. But was Hawthorne's advice really about the crown? Years earlier, he had been in line for a major honor within the household, only to watch it slip away after a scheduling disaster that humiliated Camilla in front of foreign dignitaries at a state dinner. Hawthorne took the blame for that disaster, and he believed deep down that Camilla herself made sure he got crushed for it. He never said a word about that grudge during months of meetings about her title. He didn't have to. More than one advisor later whispered that Hawthorne's certainty on this particular subject burned a little too hot to be pure duty. One advisor even joked privately months later that Hawthorne had waited a very long time to finally win that argument with Camilla, and he wasn't about to lose it twice. To make matters even more humiliating for Camilla, William knew 2 full weeks before she ever touched that tablet. He smiled beside her at 3 separate family events during those 2 weeks. knowing exactly what was coming for her, and he said nothing. Why? Because his silence came with a price tag. In exchange for keeping quiet, William locked in a guarantee that his own household with Catherine would be financially protected, untouchable, and secured before his father's health collapsed any further. There's another detail that makes William's silence even harder to forgive. During one of those 3 family events, Camilla reportedly turned to him privately and asked, almost jokingly, whether he'd heard any unusual talk going around the palace lately. William looked her in the eye and told her everything seemed calm. He lied to her face, while already holding the exact paperwork that would end her title 2 weeks later, and he did it smoothly enough that she walked away, reassured that everything was fine. Catherine herself reportedly had no idea about the deal until weeks later, and when she found out, she was furious that her husband had used another woman's pain as a bargaining chip without even telling her. She confronted William quietly at home, asking him point-blank whether he would have done the same thing to her own mother if the situation were reversed. William had no real answer for that question either, and the silence between them that night lasted almost as long as the silence between his father and Camilla. Charles had braced for his wife's rage, but he never imagined the deepest betrayal would come from his own son, and the worst was still coming, buried inside a letter written by a dead woman who saw all of this coming decades ago. What the crown was really protecting. Locked away in the late Queen Elizabeth's private papers sits a letter almost nobody has ever been allowed to read. Princess Diana wrote it near the end of her life, and one line from it haunts this entire story. "The woman who comes after me will be punished twice," she warned. "Once by the country and once by whoever inherits her guilt." Advisors carried that warning into their private talks with Charles without ever showing him the actual letter. Did Charles even know he was being guided by a dead woman's prophecy? Maybe not, but it shaped everything anyway. Only 3 people inside the entire household reportedly know the letter still exists at all, and Elizabeth herself has refused for years to let anyone publish it or even quote it directly. Some advisors who knew of its existence treated it less like a private letter and more like an old, dangerous weapon, something to be pulled out only when it could push a decision in the direction they already wanted. Just think about what that really means. This wasn't just modern politics deciding Camilla's fate. Part of it was a dead woman's warning, which some advisors turned into a sort of proof to convince themselves that crushing Camilla was somehow justice for Diana, decades after her death. And the damage didn't stop with Charles and Camilla. Tom spent 2 furious days hunting for a lawyer to challenge the whole thing in court. But his sister Laura Lopes talked him down, warning him that dragging their mother's pain into a courtroom would only hand the tabloids exactly the spectacle the palace prayed to avoid. The smartest move now, Laura argued, was to starve the story of a second explosive news cycle. Tom reportedly agreed, but only after making Laura promise that if the palace ever tried anything like this again, they would fight back with everything they had, lawyers included. And here's the twist that proves this was never just about one missing word. The same quiet changes that erased consort from Camilla's title also tightened the rules around her future widow's allowance and her long-term home. So this wasn't a heartbroken husband adjusting how the world describes his wife. This was an institution protecting its own bank account, hiding behind a wording change, while Camilla absorbed every ounce of the pain alone. A former financial advisor to the household later admitted that the timing of these 2 changes happening together was no accident at all. Burying a financial decision inside an emotional scandal, he said, was simply easier than explaining either one on its own. Then, just when the story seemed like it had hit rock bottom, one final blow landed. Charles's estranged son, Prince Harry, fired off a text from California straight to Tom. On the surface, it read like sympathy. "This is what happens to everyone who isn't born first in that family," Harry wrote. But people close to Harry know better. That message wasn't a comfort, it was vindication. It gave new proof to an old wound that came from years of living in William's shadow, and that wound was finally ready to scream. Camilla's tragedy had just become a weapon in someone else's war. A war that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with Harry's own buried rage. And here's the real danger hiding inside that leaked text. Harry might finally be ready to say in public what he has only ever whispered behind closed doors. Friends close to him say he has already turned down 2 interview requests this year, but for the first time, he didn't say no immediately. He said he would think about it. So where does all this leave the crown now? It leaves it sitting squarely on the shoulders of William and Catherine, who are about to inherit a monarchy that just proved for the whole world to see that loyalty means nothing once the institution decides it's inconvenient. Catherine reportedly told a close friend in the days after the news broke that watching what happened to Camilla felt like staring into a mirror aimed 30 years into her own future. If the palace could erase one queen's place in history with a single document, what protection did she actually have? Beyond a husband who had already shown, through his silence, exactly how far he was willing to bend when the institution asked him to. That fear didn't go away once the headlines moved on. If anything, it settled in deeper, becoming something Catherine now carries quietly into every public appearance she makes beside William, smiling for cameras while privately wondering how much of that smile she'll be allowed to keep in 30 years' time.